The wind hammered against the tactical tent with fists of ice, rattling the canvas walls like they were nothing more than paper. Inside, 8 soldiers sat in rigid silence as Colonel Victor Kane pinned a photograph to the briefing board. A woman, mid-30s, unremarkable except for eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera and into some distant, frozen horizon. The temperature outside hovered at 15 below zero, but the cold in that tent had nothing to do with Wyoming's merciless winter. Kane's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Codename Winter's Ghost. 17 confirmed kills attributed to this target over 6 years. She doesn't miss. She doesn't panic. And she absolutely will not surrender. Sergeant Maya Cross, a Minnesota native who'd grown up in sub-zero temperatures, leaned forward with a slight smirk. "Just one woman, sir?" Kane turned slowly, his weathered face carved from decades of command decisions that had sent young soldiers into situations from which some never returned. 23 teams before you thought the same thing, Sergeant. 4 survivors total. Each one came back with the same story. Gear arranged in circles, teammates vanished without a trace, and messages written in snow. He let that sink in, watching confidence drain from faces around the tent. You'll enter at 0400. Terrain is 60 square miles of forest and ridgelines. Visibility will be 30 feet at best. Radio check-ins every 30 minutes, no exceptions. Lieutenant Nash Garrett, Alpha team leader and a decorated mountain warfare specialist, studied the photograph with growing unease. Something about those eyes felt familiar, though he couldn't place why. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Hidden Sniper Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? 11 miles into the mountain range, in a cabin barely visible against the snow-laden pines, Elena Frost knelt beside her wood stove and listened. She was 34 years old, lean from years of survival living, with scars on her hands that told stories she never spoke aloud. Her hair, once kept regulation short, now fell past her shoulders in dark waves streaked with premature gray. But it was her eyes, those same eyes from Kane's photograph, that held the real story, scanning constantly, reading wind patterns and shadow movements the way most people read newspapers. She'd heard them gearing up 3 days ago when she'd descended to the valley town for supplies. The whispers in the gas station, the fresh tire tracks leading to the military staging area. The familiar tension that settled over small communities when armed strangers arrived with official papers and terse explanations. This would be the 7th year, the 24th team. Elena wrapped her rifle in white cloth, checked the action without looking, and shouldered a pack that weighed exactly 42 pounds. Enough for 2 weeks if she rationed, though she'd never needed more than 5 days to convince them to leave. She didn't load the rifle. She never did. Her father's words echoed in the silence of the cabin. Survival isn't about fighting harder, Elena. It's about making your enemy fight themselves. James Frost had been an Army Ranger, 2 combat tours that left him with shrapnel in his hip, and nightmares that eventually consumed him. He'd taught Elena to read terrain like a language, the way snow drifted around obstacles, how wind carved specific patterns in powder, which animal tracks meant water sources, and which meant predators. When she was 12, he'd taken her into these same mountains during a blizzard, and made her find her way back to camp using only the land's whispers. "The cold is honest," he'd said, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "It doesn't lie, doesn't pretend to be what it isn't. Respect that honesty, and it'll tell you everything you need to know." 3 years after that lesson, James Frost put his service pistol in his mouth and pulled the trigger. The PTSD and the IED injuries had finally broken through the discipline he'd maintained for decades. Elena found him in his workshop, surrounded by maps of places he'd never talk about and medals he'd stopped wearing. She joined Special Operations 6 months later, driven by grief and a need to understand what had taken her father. She excelled reconnaissance, long-range observation, and eventually sniper operations, where her ability to remain motionless for hours made her invaluable. She never missed, not once in 4 years of active deployment. Until Morocco. The mission had been classified, the orders clear: eliminate a high-value target coordinating weapons shipments through a residential neighborhood. Elena had the shot-perfect sight picture, controlled breathing, finger on the trigger. Then the target walked into a schoolyard and picked up a child. A schoolteacher approached, laughing. 2 more children ran up. Elena's spotter whispered, "Take the shot. Orders are execute on sight." She'd lowered the rifle, refused the order, documented civilians in the target area, and requested mission abort, Command denied it. Ordered her to fire. She walked away from the scope, from the mission, from the military that had shaped her entire adult life. The court-martial paperwork was being prepared when she disappeared into these mountains. The same ones where her father had taught her that honesty, even painful honesty, mattered more than obedience. Now, listening to the distant rumble of military vehicles positioning for the pre-dawn insertion, Elena felt no anger toward the soldiers who would soon be hunting her. They were following orders, just as she once had. The difference was that she'd learned orders weren't always right, and that lesson had cost her everything except her conscience. She pulled on white thermal gear, laced boots that left minimal tracks, and stepped into the storm. The wind immediately wrapped around her like a living thing, but she moved through it with practiced ease, reading its currents, using its howl to mask her movements. Somewhere below, 8 soldiers were preparing to enter her world. They would bring discipline, tactics, and superior numbers. She would bring understanding. The mountain, indifferent and eternal, would decide which mattered more. At 0400 exactly, 2 teams crossed the tree line and entered what Lieutenant Garrett privately thought looked less like a forest and more like a white maze designed by something that didn't want humans to succeed. Alpha Squad consisted of Garrett, Corporal Jenna Reed, Private Owen Blake, and Private Liam Cross. Bravo Squad, led by Sergeant Maya Cross, included Specialist Finn Park, Private Rachel Holt, and Private Ty Morgan. The plan was simple. Alpha would sweep north-northwest along the ridgeline, while Bravo took the valley approach, converging on known coordinates where thermal imaging had detected heat signatures consistent with a cabin. Radio check-ins every 30 minutes. No deviation from protocol. Within 2 hours, protocol began to feel like a suggestion the mountain had politely declined. Private Owen Blake spotted it first. A trail of footprints leading deeper into the pines, clear and deliberate. "Contact," he whispered into his radio, adrenaline sharpening his voice, fresh tracks maybe 20 minutes old. Garrett moved up to examine them, his mountain warfare training immediately catching details that made his skin prickle despite the cold. The tracks were too perfect, too obvious. In snow this deep and wind this constant, prints should be partially filled, edges softened. These looked freshly pressed, as if someone wanted them found. "It's bait," Corporal Jenna Reed said quietly, crouching beside him. She'd grown up in Alaska, knew winter the way city kids knew subway systems. No one who lives out here moves this carelessly. But Owen was already 10 yards ahead, following the trail with the eager confidence of someone who'd trained extensively, but never faced an opponent who understood that training better than the trainers did. Garrett made the command decision to pursue abandoning obvious bait could mean missing the actual target. They moved forward in tactical formation, weapons ready, breath controlled. The footprints led them in a wide arc through dense pines, then simply vanished at a frozen creek bed. Not faded, vanished. As if the person making them had been lifted into the air mid-stride. Liam Cross, the quietest member of Alpha, knelt and studied the last print. "She walked backward in her own tracks," he said, voice tight. "Old ranger trick. Impossible to tell where the trail actually ends." 3 miles south, Bravo Squad encountered their first unraveling. Ty Morgan, the youngest at 22, and eager to prove himself on his first mountain deployment, had been sweeping left flank when a branch snapped 40 yards ahead. Maya Cross signaled halt, watching the tree line with the patience her Minnesota winters had taught her. Snow fell in thick curtains, reducing visibility to arm's length. "Movement," Finn Park whispered, his first mountain operation making him jumpy. 2 o'clock, definitely movement. The team converged on the position, weapons raised, training overriding the instinct that whispered this felt wrong. They found nothing, just a branch weighted with snow that had finally cracked, and a set of deer tracks leading away. When they turned back to regroup, Private Rachel Holt was gone. Not missing in the sense of wandered off gone, she'd been at the rear of their formation 15 seconds earlier. Maya had looked forward to check the GPS, looked back, and found empty snow where a fully geared soldier should have been standing. No shout, no struggle, no sound of any kind. "Halt!" Maya's command voice cut through the wind, protocol forgotten in the sudden spike of fear. "Rachel, respond." Silence. Just wind and the whisper of falling snow. They backtracked, found her last position marked by boot prints that simply stopped. Beside them, arranged with unnatural neatness, sat Holt's rifle, radio, and pack. No drag marks. No blood. No indication of how 140 pounds of soldier and gear had simply ceased to exist. carved in the snow beside the equipment, written with what looked like a simple stick, Turin BACK. Maya stared at those words, feeling something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the primal understanding that she was no longer at the top of the food chain. But pride, that uniquely human flaw, made her key her radio. Bravo to command. One soldier unaccounted for. Continuing mission. Colonel Kane's voice crackled back, heavy with resignation. Acknowledged, Bravo. Mark the position and proceed. What would you have done in that moment? Followed orders into an increasingly hostile situation, or admitted that something beyond your training was happening in those mountains? By hour 6, both teams were showing cracks. Alpha Squad had circled back to the same lightning-scarred pine 3 times. Despite Garrett's precise navigation and GPS confirmation, they were moving in straight lines. The mountain was bending their perception, using the uniform whiteness and repetitive terrain to create a maze without walls. Owen Blake's voice rose with barely controlled panic. Sir, we passed this tree at 0800. I marked it with my knife. We're going in circles. Jenna Reed checked her compass, then checked it again, then tapped it like the problem might be mechanical rather than fundamental. Magnetic anomaly? She suggested, but her tone said she didn't believe it. Garrett was about to respond when his radio erupted with static, then Finn Park's voice high and tight. Bravo has contact. I repeat, contact confirmed. 50 yards, tree line, definitely. The transmission cut to white noise. Alpha tried to raise Bravo for 7 minutes. 7 minutes of increasingly desperate calls met with silence. Finally, Maya Cross's voice came through, scraped raw and barely controlled. Alpha, this is Cross. Park is gone. Vasquez is gone. I'm alone. Define gone, Garrett demanded, but he already knew the answer. Gone. Vanished. I had eyes on Park, turned to check R6, and he wasn't there anymore. Found his gear stacked like Holtz. Found another message. What did it say? A long pause filled with wind and the sound of Maya's controlled breathing, the kind of breathing you did when you were fighting to stay calm. It said, Owen one needs to survive. Liam Cross, no relation to Maya despite the shared name, started laughing. Not hysterical exactly, but edged with the kind of understanding that comes when your brain accepts something impossible. She's giving us a choice, he said. Walk away or join the disappeared. Owen turned on him, fear converting to anger the way it often did in young soldiers. We're trained for this. We're not going to be defeated by some deserter playing mind games in? The ground collapsed beneath Owen's feet. It wasn't an avalanche, wasn't even particularly dramatic. The snow simply gave way where Elena had carefully undermined a natural overhang, and Owen dropped 8 feet into a drift so deep and soft it swallowed him completely. By the time Garrett and Reed hauled him out, he was hypothermic and incoherent, mumbling about hands pulling him down, even though they'd verified the collapse was entirely natural. They had no choice but to leave him in a bivouac shelter with chemical warmers and a flare marked on GPS for extraction. 3 remained from Alpha. Garrett made a decision that would haunt him later. We link up with what's left of Bravo. Safety in numbers. Except the mountain, it turned out, didn't care about numbers. The gear appeared at dawn like an art installation, arranged in a perfect circle in a clearing neither team had reported encountering. Every piece of equipment from both squads, weapons, packs, radios, even the personal items soldiers carry despite regulations. Arranged with museum precision, each item exactly 1 foot from the next, creating a circle 30 feet in diameter. In the center, carved deep in the snow, you can leave now. Garrett, Reed, and Maya Cross stood at the clearing's edge, watching the sunrise paint the snow in shades of rose and gold. They were the only ones left. The others, Owen, Liam, Finn, Rachel, Ty, gone. Not dead, the rational part of Garrett's mind insisted. Just gone. Removed from the equation by someone who understood this terrain so intimately, she could make trained soldiers vanish like morning fog. She's here, Maya whispered, watching us right now. As if in response, a figure stepped from the tree line. White thermal gear, no weapon visible, hands raised to show they were empty. She walked with the casual confidence of someone in their own living room, and when she lowered her hood, Garrett felt recognition slam into him like a physical force. He'd seen this face before. In classified briefings about Morocco, in hushed conversations about the sniper who'd refused an illegal kill order and vanished rather than murder children. Elena Frost stopped 20 feet away, close enough to speak without shouting, far enough to disappear if they made a move. Her voice, when she spoke, was surprisingly gentle. I didn't kill them. Jenna Reed's rifle was up, trained on center mass, but her hands shook. Where are they? Sleeping. Controlled hypothermia. Elena gestured vaguely toward the trees. It's a survival technique my father taught me. Lower body temperature gradually, induce unconsciousness, keep them safe from exposure. They'll wake in a few hours, cold but completely alive. That's impossible, Maya said, but her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself. Is it? You grew up in Minnesota, Sergeant Cross. You know what happens when someone gets truly cold. The body shuts down to protect itself. I just helped that process along, then sheltered them. Elena's expression remained neutral, almost sad. Did you really think I spent 6 years killing soldiers sent to bring me in? What purpose would that serve? Garrett lowered his weapon slowly, pieces falling into a picture he didn't want to see. Your special operations. The sniper from Morocco. Former special operations, Elena corrected. I refused to kill children. Command called it desertion. You could have faced court-martial, presented your case, to the same command structure that ordered me to shoot through a schoolteacher to reach my target? To the institution that would rather bury one soldier than admit the order was criminal? Elena's voice remained level, but something fierce flickered in her eyes. I chose differently. As she spoke, figures began emerging from the tree line behind her. Owen Blake, stumbling and confused. Liam Cross, shaking but coherent. The Bravo squad members they'd thought lost. All disoriented, all clearly hypothermic, but moving under their own power. Elena had positioned them upwind, letting them wake naturally as dawn's warmth began to counter the induced cold. Maya Cross stared at her missing team members, her tactical mind trying to process how someone had non-lethally neutralized 7 trained soldiers across difficult terrain in near-zero visibility. You could have killed us all. Every shot opportunity imaginable, yes, Elena agreed simply. But you're not my enemy. You're just following orders, same as I used to. The difference is, I learned that following wrong orders makes you complicit in them. Garrett's radio crackled. Colonel Kane's voice, demanding status, demanding confirmation, demanding the report that would justify another team, another hunt, another year of institutional pride, refusing to admit defeat. Elena watched Garrett's hand move to the radio, made no move to stop him. She simply stood there, giving him the choice, and in that moment he understood the real lesson she'd been teaching all along. He keyed the radio. Alpha, actual to command. Target lost in avalanche event. No bodies recovered. Multiple casualties from exposure. Requesting immediate extraction for medical treatment. Kane's response came after a long pause. Acknowledged, Alpha. Mark your position. Birds inbound in 20 mics. Elena held Garrett's gaze for 3 heartbeats, then nodded once. A gesture of respect between soldiers who'd both made impossible choices. She turned to leave, and Jenna Reed, acting on pure instinct, snapped to attention and saluted. Elena paused, her back still turned, and for just a moment her shoulders sagged under weight, invisible but no less real. Then she straightened and disappeared into the pines without looking back. A ghost choosing to remain a ghost because the alternative meant surrendering to a system she could no longer serve. The extraction helicopters found 8 soldiers suffering from exposure and mild hypothermia, none with injuries that couldn't be explained by difficult terrain and harsh weather. Their stories matched perfectly avalanche, separated teams, fortunate survival through training and luck. Not one of them mentioned the woman who'd let them live when she could have done otherwise. Would you have reported her? Or would you have understood that some battles aren't meant to be won, only survived? The debriefing room at Forward Operating Base Blackwood smelled like stale coffee, and the particular tension that comes when official reports don't quite match the truth everyone knows is lurking beneath. Colonel Victor Kane sat across from Lieutenant Garrett, a file folder open between them that was thicker than seemed reasonable for a simple training accident. 23 teams, Kane said without preamble. 6 years. Your squad makes 4 groups of survivors. He tapped the folder. 4 identical reports about avalanches and exposure. 4 groups who all somehow forgot to mention a single woman who made 7 soldiers disappear without firing a shot. Garrett kept his expression neutral, the way you did when a superior officer was inviting you to either lie or end your career. Sir, The after-action report is thorough and accurate. It's thorough, Kane agreed, not sure about accurate. He leaned back, studying Garrett with eyes that had seen too many young officers try to maintain composure while their world tilted. You know why we keep sending teams? Not because we think we'll catch her. We stopped believing that after year 3. Then why? Because admitting we can't catch one deserter means admitting we trained someone better than our system can handle. Means admitting that maybe, just maybe, the soldier who refused an illegal order had better judgment than the colonels who gave it. Kane pulled out a photograph. Elena in dress uniform, younger, before Morocco, before the mountains claimed her. I was her commanding officer. I gave the order, she refused. The confession hung in the air like gun smoke. Garrett processed implications, watched his former certainty about chain of command crumble a little further. She saved civilian witnesses. Children, she did. And in doing so, she made me and everyone up the chain look like you were willing to execute non-combatants to complete a mission. Kane's voice carried old bitterness. The court-martial paperwork was being drafted when she vanished. If she'd stayed, I'd probably be retired under a cloud instead of actively serving. Her disappearance became the easiest solution for everyone. Except her. Except her, Kane acknowledged. These annual hunts. They're my penance and my pride battling it out. I want her found and cleared, but I also can't admit that she was right and I was wrong. He closed the folder. Tell me honestly, Lieutenant, could you have caught her? Garrett thought about footprints that vanished mid-stride, about messages written in snow, about a woman who'd orchestrated the non-lethal removal of 7 trained operators across 60 square miles of hostile terrain. No, sir. She wasn't running from us. She was teaching us. Teaching you what? That the mountain doesn't care about rank. That understanding terrain matters more than superior firepower. That? Garrett paused, choosing words carefully. That sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to fight on someone else's terms. Kane nodded slowly, something like satisfaction crossing his weathered features. Sergeant Cross requested immediate transfer to desert operations. Private Reed submitted her resignation this morning. What about you, Lieutenant? I'd like to stay, sir. Request assignment to the Ethics Training Command. For the first time in the conversation, Kane smiled, not happy exactly, but genuine. Request approved. You're dismissed. Garrett stood, saluted, and was almost to the door when Kane spoke again. For what it's worth, Lieutenant, I'm glad she let you live. And I hope she finds whatever peace those mountains can offer her. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted, I don't think she's looking for peace. I think she already found it. We were just too busy hunting her to notice. 6 months later, Elena Frost descended from the Montana high country to a small town that existed primarily to service hunters, hikers, and the occasional lost soul looking for meaning in wilderness. She needed supplies. Coffee, ammunition she wouldn't use, batteries for a radio she kept for emergencies but never turned on. The gas station clerk, a veteran in his 60s with a 1st Cavalry Division patch on his worn jacket, rang up her purchases without comment. Then he noticed the tattoo on her wrist when she handed him cash. A small ranger tab, barely visible, the kind of mark soldiers got to honor fallen family. He didn't speak, just nodded. One veteran to another, acknowledging service without demanding details. By the time Elena left, word had spread through the veteran community that moved through town like a quiet underground network. When she stopped at the motel that night, the owner, another vet, charged her half price and didn't ask for ID. The breakfast diner comped her meal. The construction foreman offered her cash work, no questions, no paperwork. They didn't know who she was, didn't know about Morocco or the 23 teams or the file that Colonel Kane kept locked in his desk. They just knew one of their own needed sanctuary, and sanctuary was something you gave freely to those who'd earned it through sacrifice. Elena spent 2 weeks there, framing houses and replacing her worn gear before the mountains called her back. She always returned. The wilderness was honest in ways civilization had forgotten how to be. On her last morning, she bought a newspaper and saw the headline buried on page 7, Military ends mountain training program after multiple accidents. The article mentioned equipment failures and harsh conditions, suggested a comprehensive review of cold weather protocols. No mention of winter's ghost. No mention of the woman who'd taught 23 teams that respect mattered more than conquest. She folded the paper, left it on the diner counter, and drove north toward the high country where she'd made her peace with choices that had cost her everything except her integrity. 3 days later, from a ridgeline 7,000 feet above sea level, Elena watched through binoculars as a convoy of military vehicles approached the old staging area. New teams, younger officers. The same confident posture of people who'd studied her previous tactics and believed they'd found the counter-strategy. She didn't feel anger, exactly. More like weary inevitability. They would keep coming until they finally learned the lesson, or until someone high enough in command had the courage to admit that catching her mattered less than understanding why she ran. Elena watched them deploy, 8 fresh soldiers moving with textbook precision into terrain that would humble that precision within hours. She could see their future. The confusion, the vanishings, the messages in snow, the dawn revelation that they'd been fighting an opponent who'd already won by refusing to engage on their terms. She thought about her father, about the lessons he'd taught her in these same mountains before PTSD and honorable service destroyed him from within. She thought about Morocco, about the schoolteacher whose life she'd saved by refusing an order, about the children who'd never know how close they'd come to being collateral damage in someone else's war. Most of all, she thought about Garrett and Reed and Maya Cross, about soldiers who'd been given impossible orders and had chosen, in the end, to value truth over protocol. The new team disappeared into the tree line. Elena shouldered her pack, checked her father's old compass, and headed deeper into the wilderness, not running from them. Simply choosing, again and again, to live on terms she could accept. The mountain, indifferent and eternal, accepted her choice without judgment. It always had. Lieutenant Garrett sat in his new office at the Ethics Training Command, reading incident reports from the latest attempt to capture Winter's ghost. Captain Seth Warner, the new team leader, had made a decision that Garrett recognized immediately. He'd turned back after the first vanishing, after finding gear arranged in a circle and a message in snow that said, "Turn back." Warner's report was refreshingly honest. Target demonstrated superior tactical awareness and non-lethal removal capabilities. Risk to personnel outweighed mission objectives. Recommended mission termination per protocol, 6-4. Garrett smiled. Someone was learning. His phone rang. Colonel Kane, now retired but still consulting on special operations training, sounded almost pleased. Warner made the right call. Yes, sir, he did. You know what this means? They're going to close the file. Winter's ghost becomes an operational footnote, a training example about the importance of knowing when to abort a mission. Kane paused. She's free. She was always free, sir. We just finally figured that out. After the call ended, Garrett pulled out a map of Montana and Wyoming, marked with 7 years of hunt coordinates. The pattern was subtle but clear if you knew what to look for. Elena had been slowly moving north, into more remote territory, away from the annual incursions, making it harder each year, teaching each team more emphatically that some people couldn't be caught because they'd already found what everyone else was searching for. He thought about writing her a letter, leaving it at one of the known campsites. Just 2 words, thank you. For teaching him that courage wasn't always loud, that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was refuse to participate in something fundamentally wrong. In the end, he didn't. Respect, he learned, was sometimes silence rather than spectacle. So he filed the report, noted Warner's successful abort decision, and added his recommendation that the Winter's ghost operation be permanently closed. 3 weeks later, the file was officially archived. Elena Frost, codename Winter's Ghost. Status, unlocatable. Case closed. Elena found the note 3 months after the team stopped coming. She descended to one of her old campsites, the one near the thermal spring where she sometimes spent winters when the cold became more enemy than companion. Someone had left a military-issue MRE and a simple card with 2 words written in careful handwriting, "Thank you." Garrett. She burned the card, watching ash spiral up into clean mountain air. Burning wasn't dismissal. It was acknowledgement without attachment, the kind of respect her father had taught her to give to things that mattered but couldn't be kept. The mountains settled into their winter rhythm around her. She guided occasional hunters, teaching them to read weather and respect terrain. She ran a small veterans support group out of a church basement in the valley town, never using her real name, never discussing her own service. Just listening to other ghosts find their way back to something like peace. Some of them asked about the scar on her wrist, the Ranger Tab tattoo that marked her as part of a brotherhood that never truly ended. She'd smile and say, "Family legacy," which was true enough. On the 7th anniversary of her final mission in Morocco, Elena climbed to the highest ridge in her territory and looked out over hundreds of miles of wilderness that had become more home than any structure humans had built. She thought about the children she'd saved by refusing that order, wondered what they were doing now, if they ever knew how close they'd come to being footnotes in someone else's career advancement. She thought about all the soldiers who'd hunted her, not with anger, but with something closer to kinship. They'd been doing their jobs, following orders, trying to be good soldiers. Just like she'd been before Morocco taught her that good soldiers sometimes had to become something else entirely. The wind carried snow across the peaks, painting the world white and clean. Elena pulled out her father's compass, the one he carried through 2 wars, and brought home to teach his daughter about true north. The kind that had nothing to do with magnetic poles, and everything to do with internal calibration. She spoke into the wind, words for her father and for herself, and for every soldier who'd ever had to choose between orders and conscience. The mountain taught me what you couldn't, Dad. It taught me that strength isn't domination, it's understanding. And that sometimes walking away from the fight they want you to have is its own kind of victory. The wind answered with indifferent honesty, and Elena smiled. She'd made her peace with choices that had cost her rank, career, and the life she'd planned. In return, she'd gained something the military had never offered: the freedom to live according to principles that couldn't be ordered away. She descended toward her winter camp as snow began to fall, a ghost by choice rather than defeat, finally and completely free. Elena Frost remains in those mountains today, a legend that military instructors tell young officers as a cautionary tale about the limits of force and the importance of understanding your operational environment. They never use her real name. They never mention Morocco. But they teach the lesson she spent 6 years drilling into 23 teams, that respect for terrain, for limits, and for conscience matters more than any tactical advantage. The soldiers who survived encounters with Winter's ghost: Garrett, Reed, Maya Cross, Warner, and the handful of others who made it back. They meet once a year at a quiet bar in Montana. They don't talk about Elena directly, don't speculate about where she might be or what she's doing. They just raise a toast to the woman who taught them that true courage sometimes looks like refusal, that real strength requires knowing when not to fight. And somewhere in the high country, in a camp that moves with the seasons, a woman who was supposed to be captured or killed 7 years ago sits by a fire and listens to the honest voice of winter wind. She's older now, grayer, carved lean by a life that demands everything and gives back only what you earn through understanding. But she's also free in ways that have nothing to do with paperwork or official status. Free from orders that contradict conscience. Free from systems that value compliance over correctness. Free to live according to lessons learned from a father who taught her to read mountains and from experience that taught her to read herself. The snow falls, the wind howls, and Elena Frost, once hunted, never caught, finally at peace, simply exists in the space between civilization and wild, belonging fully to neither, beholden only to the compass that points true north regardless of what anyone orders it to do. If this story moved you, subscribe to Hidden Sniper Stories. These aren't just tales of battle. They're stories of the human spirit refusing to break, even when the whole world demands it. Share this with someone who needs to hear that walking away from the wrong fight is its own kind of victory. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Elena's place? Would you have followed orders, or would you have chosen the mountains? Until next time, stay humble, stay human, and remember, the mountain always wins. Not through force, but through the simple, indifferent honesty of being exactly what it is, demanding you become exactly what you must be to survive it. And sometimes, that's the greatest teacher you'll ever find.